Hi folks, the purpose of this training is to look at the integration of Auth0 with Tempered's Airwall conductor. There's really two main purposes you would integrate with an authentication platform within Tempered's conductor. One is to allow users that may already be configured in a second authentication platform to be able to connect to the conductor itself. You might also want to enable a second factor of authentication. Or for remote access agents, so somebody running the Airwall agent on might be a vendor or any remote access user, you might want a second factor of authentication. And so that can be easily configured in Auth0. And so we'll go through both of those setups in this training. Before we get into the configuration of the conductor and Auth0, let's look at a configuration that's already set up and working so you see what it looks like for the user. So when they go to log into their conductor, they now will have the option to choose a second factor or a second authentication provider other than the local users on the conductor. So I'll choose Auth0 and click Sign In. This takes me to the Auth0 verification page. I've already entered my username and password using this browser, so it's cached that, and now I just need to go to my phone and click Allow. So I've enabled multi-factor authentication. That takes me into the conductor. And you'll see I'm now logged in as an Auth0 user. It happens to be ricktempered@gmail.com. And if we go to the People tab, you'll see I'm logged in with sysadmin capabilities. Next, let's look at, I'm going to go ahead and sign in as just my regular user. Okay, so now let's go look at a Airwall agent. So if we click on Airwall agents, I'm going to go into this particular Windows agent and enable require authentication. So I'm going to require authenticated Airwall session, and I can choose Auth0, which we'll get through the setup here in just a bit, and I'll click Update Settings. So once I do that, here's that Airwall agent, and you'll see, okay, I immediately get prompted for needing user authentication. So if I click that, and note that it said, and note that I'm losing connectivity to my devices here. Let me just refresh this, click Advanced. Alright, so this takes me to the Auth0 page. Note that it said Okta there for a second, and that's because I need to refresh the browser. So now I can go ahead and enter my remote Airwall agent user. So for this, I'm going to use and once again, I've got two-factor authentication turned on, so I'm going to go in here and allow that. And then it asks me to confirm my remote session authentication. So I'll confirm that. And now we should see, notice user authentication is authenticated. My connectivity to my devices continues right away. And now it shows that I'm authenticated to that particular user, rickauth0@searing.com. So that's how it looks for the end user. They're required for connectivity to enter that username and password, and then in this case I had to do the second factor of authentication with my phone. So that's kind of a demo of it working with both the conductor and the remote Airwall agent. Next, let's take a look at how things get set up in Auth0. Now let's look at the basic setup within Auth0. I've simply created a developer account, so it probably looks pretty basic compared to what you might have, but this should help you understand all the main steps that need to be configured within Auth0, and then we'll go into the conductor next. So I've simply created an application, and I'm actually going to just look at an existing configuration versus create one here. So if we look at the settings of this application, you can see I've given it a name and it has a domain based on what Auth0 assigns. And we've got a client ID and secret. Now those will be important for configuring in the conductor, so those are used to authenticate back and forth. And then just a description. You can also add a logo. As you may have noticed earlier when I logged in, it had the tempered logo, so we can add that there. And now we get into the stuff that has to be configured. So a regular web application and the token endpoint authentication method must be set to basic. The application login URI should be the URL of your conductor. And the probably most important one, the allowed callback URL would be your conductor URL, followed by user auth openid _ connect/callback. And then the logout URL will just be your normal conductor URL. So those are kind of the basics for the application. Nothing else needs to be changed down here. And that should be enough to get started. The next thing you'll need to do is actually create a rule. So I'll have to go to rules, click create rule, and you're going to add groups to OIDC token as a rule. And if we go look at the configuration of that particular rule, you're actually going to paste in this text, which you can get from our online configuration guide. And so you've got to paste in this script, and then you want to make sure within this script that you actually go modify this constant to be the name of your Auth0 namespace or account. So you can see it's got the developers, it might be yourcompany.auth0.com. And that constant gets used, throughout this little script. So very important step. This takes care of the groups claim within Auth0. So we can save that. So now we've got our rule. The next thing we'll do is create roles, and the roles should match what you create in the conductor, and we're going to go through that next. So I've just used a couple of the default ones here: remote user cond _ remote _ users and cond _ system _ admins. Note that you can also create custom ones as well. Once you create a role, you can then go in and add your users to that role, so you have a user to test with. That should be all that's required. Obviously, you can go in here and set up multi-factor authentication and all of that fun stuff within Auth0, which you can use their documentation to define. So now let's go look at the conductor side. So on the conductor, I'm going to go in here and log in and go down to authentication. I already set it up, so we're just going to take a look at it. And I've got to grab my password, just 1 second. It does ask you to authenticate again to your conductor. Alright, so now to set up the conductor side of the Auth0 integration, you just put in a provider name. So remember, that's what shows up in the login screen. You'll put in the name of your conductor URL in the conductor host field. And then for Auth0, for the OpenID Connect host, this is just going to be your Auth0 host. And for the issuer, it's going to be the same. So you don't need any additional text here for Auth0. And then remember that client ID and secret that I pointed out. You have to add that here to do the authentication between the conductor and Auth0. And then you click Next. This is where we're going to set up our groups to role mappings. So I actually encourage you to use kind of the defaults to start out with, but then you can always go in and add additional comma-separated lists here. And any group that you configure here has to be configured in Auth0, and then when Auth0 sends over the user, it looks at that group to assign them the proper role within the conductor. And then finally, the filter, I would just go ahead and just name all of your groups starting with COND and use this starts with. You can always set up more complex ones and use a regex if you have existing groups within your Auth0 environment. So that's kind of a quick overview of the basics that have to be set up both within the Auth0 environment and within the conductor. So those are the basic steps to set up multi-factor authentication with Auth0 for your tempered conductor, both for accessing the conductor and for your remote Airwall agents. So hopefully this has been helpful, and thanks, and have a great day.